So welcome to the talk about Ghostrunner level design. My name is Łukasz Wabik. I am level and gameplay designer at One More Level. And I work on Ghostrigger, Ghostrunner, story DLC for Ghostrunner called Project Hell. And currently we are working on sequel Ghostrunner 2. So before I get to the topic, I should quickly explain what Ghostrunner is about for those who are not very familiar with the game. So here you have some gameplay, and it's a first-person perspective action game with a lot of platforming and combat. It's very fast-paced and difficult, and what is most important and unique about our game is the fact that it features a one-hit, one-kill mechanic. So basically you die after you get hit by a single shot. And this one fact extremely impacts how the game and how the levels are designed. And yeah, game was very, very well received. It was a huge success for us, so yeah. So let's start from the beginning. We had that idea about the game where you play as a ninja and you have to face enemies who are better equipped with guns. So you have to use your movement to get to these enemies before they can shoot you. So I created this very simple prototype that you can see right now. Yeah, and it was fun from the beginning. Everyone liked it. As you can see, this gameplay is not really that far from how the final gameplay looks like. But at this point, we wasn't sure where we will go with these ideas. So we started to experiment with level design, starting with defining metrics, of course, so sizes of everything, platforms, gaps between platforms, sizes of billboards, and when I say billboards, I mean these walls that are specifically designed to perform wall run on them. NA placement, which I mean distances between enemies, between players and enemies when he enters the arena, sizes of the arenas, and etc. And step I would call finding the fun. So basically defining and exploring what is best, what is most fun about our game. So experimenting with a lot of ideas for levels, experimenting with the best combinations of moves, finding the right difficulty. From the beginning we knew that we wanted to create a hard game because we had experience with that. But we just have to find the right spot. And it was more like a loop between level design and game design at this point, because we were still adding a lot of mechanics, we were changing the movement, tweaking it, coming up with some new ideas, for example, adding grappling hook and etc. So I believe the best way to do these experiments is to not create a whole levels from the beginning, but to create very short, small segments focused on single idea that you want to test. And we were very inspired with this approach, with this GDC talk about level design for Titanfall 2. Really great talk. I recommend to see that. And I recommend to play Titanfall 2 because it has an amazing single-player campaign. Especially if you are interested in level design, you should do that, really. And this approach is great because it lets you very easily and fast prototype and test a lot of ideas, because you don't need a context, you don't need a whole level. You can just test whatever you think could be fun at this point. And it's worth to test even some crazy ideas that you think will be impossible to fit in your game, because it may inspire some other more grounded ideas, and eventually maybe you find a way to fit all these ideas later. And some of these segments could be also used later as part of your final level. We wasn't sure if we want to go with just simple linear levels or more open one. And if our approach to combat should be just improvised and focus on moment-to-moment action, or should it has some strategic element with some planning phase or maybe stealth. So of course we made some experiments. We created some completely non-linear levels. We created some levels that was similar to, you could say, Dishonored, where there was a lot of entrances into arenas where you could observe enemies from above and plan your action before jumping into the fight. But it wasn't that. We decided to go with linear levels and improvised combat for a couple of reasons. So probably most important one hit, one kill mechanic. And what's interesting, it wasn't in the game from the beginning. We added it later at some point during experimenting phase. And yeah, it changed a lot. So dying and repeating became a part of a gameplay loop. So I think we all could agree that repeating long segments, it's not very fun. So with linear levels, we could cut these levels into short sections and put a lot of checkpoints between these sections. And thanks to that repeated segments was short. And also one hit, one kill mechanic didn't work very well with strategic combat, because planning is not very fun to repeat and stealth is taking too long. So after a few tries, players just didn't have enough patience to repeat that. They preferred to jump straight into the fight. So we made sure that player will have an option to immediately go back to the fight after he dies, and that players can learn how to deal with the arena during repeating, by repeating and by dying. We wanted to achieve this flow, I would say, of moving through levels. This moving through levels, we wanted to be very smooth. And it also was much easier to achieve with linear levels, because it's much easier to guide player with linear levels. In open ones, sometimes player has to stop for a moment and think what to do next, where to go. We just didn't want that. And same goes with strategic combat, yeah, right? So to plan actions, you have to stop. And that just wasn't the most fun thing in Ghostrunner. And of course, linear levels are just easier to produce. So we ended up with linear levels that could be cut into small sections with a lot of checkpoints between them. And we had a couple of types of these sections: platforming, combat, and cyber void. And I know that cyber void may sound like nothing, but these are these mini levels that takes place in virtual world, and I will go back to that later. Combat could be divided into linear encounters and arenas could be divided into big and small. So in a moment I will talk about each of these types of sections and how we design them. Before that, our fundamental rule of creating levels for Ghostrunner. Our levels should be built around Ghostrunner movement. So there is a list of, or maybe not all, but most of Ghostrunner moves. So obviously we have running and jumping, dashes, sensory boost, which is ability to slow down time and make strafe to dodge projectiles, sliding, and things connected more with environment like grappling hooks, zip lines, or super jump rifts. And we could say that Ghostrunner levels are just a sequence of moves, of these moves. And I know it may sound like some cheesy phrase, but I will show you that this sentence is true. Okay, so let's start with platforming sections. So these are linear sections with single path and no enemies. They usually have a low level of challenge. You could imagine it like just jumping from one platform to another, to another, to another. And we use this as a moment of relaxation between combat. And maybe it wasn't perfect, but we used them to fit some dialogues because we didn't have much more space to that. So when I have to design one of these platforming sections, I'm not thinking about geometry of these sections, but about a sequence of moves I want player to perform. And with this sequence in my mind, I can very easily block out these sections because I know all the metrics. So there is simple example of section, like it has wall run, slide, jump, dash, wall run, and the result is something like that. So what is most important is mixing different type of moves to create this just fun combination. And another example, much more longer and complicated, but again, it's a mix of different type of moves. And what is also important is not only mixing these moves, but also having a good tempo of performing these moves. This should create like a rhythm. So yeah, next we got combat, starting with linear encounters. So again, this is a single path, but now with enemies. Usually you face them one by one, and this usually have a medium level of challenge. And designing them are very similar to designing platforming sections. We just treat enemies as another obstacle on our platforming section. And now is a good time to make a short digression about design of our enemies. So just like our levels are designed around Ghostrunner movement, enemies are also designed around Ghostrunner movement. So different type of enemies encourages player to perform a different type of move to deal with that enemy. So a few examples. We got this basic enemy with pistol, so best way to beat him is to use sensory boost and dodge his projectiles. But this enemy with machine gun shoots too many projectiles to dodge them all with sensory boost, so it's better to use wall run. Next we got Frogger who jumps at you, and the best way is to dash away from him. Next Waver who shoots that very big projectile, and to dodge this you have to slide under. Drones that fly, so you have to jump over it. And even enemies that maybe doesn't require some specific type of move, still requires player to move around. So for example, you have to get behind that guy with a shield to kill him. But we broke that rule with this one enemy. So this is the ninja, and you have to stop for a moment and wait until he dashes at you and then parry his attack. And it sounded like a pretty interesting idea, but a lot of players has this reaction when they see this enemy at the arena, because player just doesn't want to stop. They don't want to interrupt their flow of movement. So one more important thing is that we can't just place our enemies randomly around levels, because they often require specific place, specific geometry. For example, if you place a Waver who shoots that very big projectile, you need to have some space to slide under the projectile. So let's get back to linear encounters. So there is a simple example. And again, you can see that this section creates that sequence of moves, similar to platforming section, but now one of these moves is just attack. Okay, and the arenas. So these are like main dishes of Ghostrunner, I could say, and places where players spends most of their time during playing. And not only players, but level designers also, because these are the hardest one to create. So these are open spaces arenas with a lot of paths and a lot of enemies. You could imagine it like a couple of platforms with enemy placed on them, and there are a lot of paths between these platforms. And arenas are the hardest part of Ghostrunner, and they are designed to be repeated. And because of that, they must provide many options. So with every dev, with every retry, players should have some different options, some to make occasion to make some different decision, to take some other path. But on the other hand, we had to be careful with not giving too many paths, because it could overwhelm player, and then they would have to stop for a moment and decide where to go. And we don't want that, because stopping at the arena means dying. So players should be able to make this decision on run. And there shouldn't be like a single best path. If you play, you probably have your favorite path, but it should more depend on what kind of player you are and what is your play style. For example, one path could be a bit safer, but longer. And I have a rule that these big arenas should be fun to move around these arenas, even if there are no more enemies on this arena. So we like to call them Skateparks, that structure. So these places should be just fun to. It should be fun to move around them. They shouldn't have like dead ends. It should be possible to just make these different loops and circle around the arena. And doing that, this arena is like created from smaller platforming sections inside the arena. So again, this running around arenas should create different combinations of moves. So there is an example of one arena from the first level, from top-down view perspective. So these gray boxes are platforms, yellow one are billboards for wall running, and green are pipes that you have to slide under. So there is one example of scenario that this arena could be beaten, and this scenario create combination like that. So again, you can see that we have a mix of different type of moves. But of course, it's not the only scenario to beat this arena. There are many more like that or like that. And again, that scenarios create different combinations. And every combination is a bit different, but it always mixes different moves. And of course, not every arena has to be the big one. We have a lot of smaller arenas. We have some arenas that are built around a specific idea or specific objects or specific enemy type. And there is an example of small arena with very simple symmetric geometry, but it is built around that super jump rift in the middle. So even if it's simple, it's very fun, because this one super jump rift gives player many options. And last type of section, cyber voids. So these are these sections that took place in in virtual world, which we called cyber void. And they are probably hardest one to define, because every one of these is a bit different. But we knew that we wanted to have something like that from the beginning of the game, from the beginning of development, because it fits perfectly our cyberpunk theme. And we knew that it will give us a lot of freedom, because it's virtual world, so we could do anything. There are even some most crazy ideas. We decided to use these cyber voids to slow down pace even more, because we felt that mixing only combat and platforming is not enough, that it still is too intense, that a player would get tired after a moment. So we made sure that player won't feel that he has to hurry inside this section. For example, the music is much slower and calmer. And we use that sections to place some puzzles that we wanted to have in our game finally. And because of slower pace, it was a good spot to fit some narration. And we also use them to introduce new skills sometimes. But we made some bad decisions about Cyber Void. So we had big trouble with designing puzzles because of our very advanced movement. The fact that you can wall run on anything and you have a lot of dashes and air dashes, player could always find some walk around puzzles, some skips. So we thought that, okay, it's a Cyber Void, maybe we could change some rules here and take away some movement abilities from the player. And yeah, it gave us some new options, but a lot of players didn't really like that. And after a time, we are not surprised because we took something that was the most fun about our game, movement. And sometimes we went too far with slowing down the pace. Some of the Cyber Void sections was too slow and too long. And sometimes they were too different, I would say. You just have to be aware that if you want to surprise player, not everyone may like it. Some of the players were expecting just a simple action game, and in these sections they get something much different. So that's it for types of our structure. And now let's see our first level and let's analyze it. So I'm sure it was the most important level in our game. First of all, it was our vertical slice. It was supposed to be our Gamescom demo. So the first time that we were going to show our game to the world, and we had no idea what to expect. It was a first level of our game, so it had to contain all the tutorials to introduce all mechanics. And it's first level, so it's a level where the player decides if he likes the game or not. Alive. And later it became also a public demo on platforms like Steam. So how was it made? Well, in big part we combined the best segments that we already created during our experimenting phase. Of course, we had to tweak them, change them, connect them. We had to add some new segments, especially for tutorials at the beginning of the level. But yeah, a big portion of blockout was already here. So there we can see a structure of the first level. So now you can see that it is built from all these type of sections that I was talking just a moment before. So we have platforming mixed with combat, both linear encounters and arenas. At the end of the level, we have a Cyber Void. And thanks to that, we could achieve a very nice pacing. If we would take these segments and place them into axis of level progress and tension, we would get something like this. Of course, this data is not only based on our feelings, but also on a lot of playtests and observing players. So we can see that combat sections has always higher tension level than adjacent platforming sections. Like I said, our platforming sections served as a transition between combats and moment of relaxation. If we would draw a tension line, we would get something like this. So we can see that the tension increases during the level progress, but in non-linear way. It has spikes at combat and drops at platforming. And at the end, the tension goes almost to zero at cyber void sections to have some satisfaction and get ready before next level. And of course, this is first level, but we could take any level of our game and do similar thing, and the result should be similar. So a few words about guiding. So to achieve that flow of movement of levels that we wanted, we had to make sure that the guiding is very clear and very straightforward. Of course, in blockout phase, it's easy, but it changes a lot if you add art. But our artist did a great job. Our guiding was super clear to the point where we had arrows painted over the billboards, but it's perfectly fine. It's worked very well. And some classic stuff, of course, so guiding with colors, lightning objects like yellow cables or yellow cloth. And sometimes we used enemies, because players are always attracted by enemies. And it's easy to spot them because they shoot projectiles at you. So a bit about our workflow. After finishing blockout, we divide level into sub-levels to make production easier and faster. I'm not sure how does it work in different engines, but in Unreal, where we work, a single level is a single file, so only one person can work on this at the same time. And by dividing this level into sub-levels, many people can work at this level at the same time. So, for example, many level artists can do art. And we also add more sub-levels, like for every department, for dialogues, for cutscenes, audio, etc. And it really makes work much faster because no one is blocking no one. And there is an example of blockout from Hell DLC. So as you can see, it's divided into 8 sub-levels. So what is important during blocking out level, we have to remember that it's going to be cut later. So we had to make these clear connections between sub-levels and have some space between these sub-levels so they won't overlap, especially after adding assets. Okay, so planning our campaign. So always at the beginning, somewhere at the beginning of production, we create that document that we call gameplay timeline. And here you can see not our original gameplay timeline. This is just an example I prepared for this presentation, but it looks almost the same. It has the same informations. So basically this document is a list of every level of our game with all the important details about each of these levels. So of course we have a setting in which this level takes place, available enemies on each level, if this level has cyber void or not, if it unlocks some new rifts or new skills or new tier for upgrades, what gameplay object does it contain, if it has something unique, a short story description, if it contains cutscene, and of course who is the owner of each level. And this document is great because you can see like your whole game in a single screen, and it very helps to distribute all these important elements of your game. So you can distribute all the toys that player will get, because you can see if you have some blank spaces somewhere in between. And the second thing is that it serves like kind of a guidebook for our level designers, because when we have to create a new level, we just look at this document and check what this level should contain and what it's about. So yeah, really great thing. So to summarize our rules during designing levels. So first of all, fundamental rule, these levels should be built around movement. Always remember that. We should combine different moves. We should avoid placing some empty corridors with just flat floor, because running in Ghostrunner is boring. So why is it called Ghostrunner then? And divide level into short sections with a lot of checkpoints to avoid repeating long segments. Mixing platforming, combat, and sometimes cyber void to keep nice spacing. Have an idea or a theme for your level, so it's very important when you could describe your level just with a single sentence. So for example, this level is about train. Yeah. Plan sub-levels in advance, so I told you just one before about that. And of course, follow our gameplay timeline document. Of course, we encounter a lot of difficulties during development. So first of all, the fact that Ghostrunner can wall run on anything. And I'm still sure it was a good decision, because it gives player much freedom and let them create their own scenarios. But yeah, level designers had many troubles with that, because it's super hard to limit space. The only sure way is just to place solid walls, and we not always want that. And like I told you before, it was very hard to design some environmental puzzles code, because with all that advanced movement, it was so easy to skip these parts and find a workaround. But the conclusion, I think, is that we worried too much about that, because the majority of players anyway will go with the path you designed, and these few who will find the skip will be just satisfied with that, because they will feel smart. So because of very fast movement, the scale of our level was huge. So it was hard to base on some real-world references in terms of metrics, for example. And it was, the artists had a lot of work, because they had to fill all these huge spaces with assets, with art. We always had a problem with fitting all the narration to our game, even if this story was simple. So like I said, we decided to use platforming sections for that, but it came out that for a lot of players, still these sections was too engaging to be able to focus on dialogues. So like we really didn't find a good solution for that in Ghostrunner 1. And sublevels are great. I recommend doing that, but they come with some difficulties sometimes. For example, there is no easy way to communicate between objects that are placed on different sublevels. So one example I could tell you about is like we had a cutscene on sublevel with cutscenes, but we wanted to start this cutscene with a button on another sublevels, and there was just no simple way to do that. I think we finally back then ended with copying this cutscene from one sublevel to another. Now we have better solutions. We communicate with objects by using tags. And boss design with one hit, one kill mechanic. I don't have time to elaborate on that, because this is a huge topic, and we could probably make another presentation just about that. But just imagine designing a interesting, difficult, fair boss when you can't make mistakes. So yeah, that's one thing that we learn by by failing some of the bosses is that might sound obvious now, but these bosses should also be designed around movement. Bosses where player have to wait for a window to attack just didn't work very good. Okay, so let's summarize with our successes and failures. So I believe we achieved levels with very good flow, with smooth movement, thanks to clear guiding. I believe we had pretty nice pacing, thanks to mixing combat, platforming, and cyber void. I think difficulty was on spot. Yeah, it was hard game, not for everybody, but I believe it still is fair game, and it gives much satisfaction. And I believe that gameplay variety was impressive. With every single new level, we introduces some new mechanics, new skills, new enemies types, some exotic gameplay from the start of the game to the end. And this could be achieved thanks to nice distributing all these things at our gameplay timeline document. So generally speaking, I think we did a pretty nice job with designing these levels, but of course not everything was perfect. There is still a lot of space for improvements. Yeah, so some cyber void decision that I talked before. Bosses, yeah, I talked about this before. Hard to focus on narration, right? So cyber void was best places to fit that dialogues, but we didn't have enough cyber void level to fit all there. And yeah, I think we sometimes even ended up with adding some empty corridors just to fit some more dialogues, which is not very good, but we had to do that. And enemy distribution could be better, because like for about first hour of gameplay, we have only one enemy with pistol, and on the other hand, some enemies appear just a few times at the end of the game, but partially it was connected with some production trouble, I think, when we started to design levels before having enough enemy types. And I think our collectibles placement was a huge missed opportunity with all our abilities. We could make them much more interesting, but it ended up with sometimes I think player could play the half of the game without even noticing that collectibles are there. And I think we learned the lesson and did much more interesting collectibles at Hell DLC. Because there you can see collectibles from your golden path, and you have to figure out how to get to them. So we have some space for optional platforming sections or for some optional simple puzzles. And it's connected with the fact that we could use some of our huge spaces better to fill it with more dense gameplay. Because sometimes we had just a really huge rooms which had to be filled with art, and players were just running through these rooms in a couple of seconds. So that was just a big waste of time. So yeah, so general tips and takeaways. So this one is obvious, of course, but it's important to remind to play your level a lot, like really a lot, after every single change. Test it and not play it only by yourself, but show it to others. Don't wait too long with showing your level to other people. Just let them play this short, separate sections. Listen to the feedback, because later it can be too late. So be aware about what is most fun in your game and build level around that. Plan your campaign, obviously. And my advice is to create a lot of short segments separated, not the level from the beginning to the end, and then choose best of these segments and connect them into final level. I don't know, it just works for me. I like this approach. Maybe it's not for everyone and probably not for every game, but I really like that approach. And very important, don't hesitate to remove and change your creations. I know that we all think that we have some great idea, even if others tell us that maybe not really. But it's important to trust them at these situations. Yeah, and listen to the feedback. Sometimes you just have to kill your babies. And it's much easier if you let your creation to lay down for some time, because then you just forget what you did. And for example, after a month, you play your level and you think, "Oh, why did I do that? It doesn't make sense. They were right." But yeah, we know how it works, and usually we don't have that much time. So sometimes we had to just trust others. And break rules if you have a good reason for that. I mean that not everything must be super defined and placed into frames. For example, I said that our combat sections were divided into linear encounters and arenas, but we have some combat encounters that couldn't be, that doesn't fit to both of this. There are somewhere between linear encounters and arenas, and if they works, if they are fun, it's perfectly fine. You don't have to change them just to make them fit the definitions, because then the game would feel like created by some algorithm, and we don't want that, yeah, right? So it should be creation of our creative minds, a work of art, I like to believe. But you have to be careful with that, because another example that I show you, so we break the rule during designing one of the enemies, where it wasn't built around movement, player had to stop for him, and that didn't work. Just keep it in mind. And that is, I guess. Thank you. And yeah. As a bonus, some video with blockout versus final level, which I really enjoy to watch. And now is the time for questions, I guess.
Hello. Hello, hello. Oh, okay. I'm playing the Ghostrunner, and it's an amazing game. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. And I have one question. Can you tell something about playtesting flow in your team?
Playtesting in our team?
Playtesting sections of levels or full levels, something about it. Thank you.
Okay, so usually we just use colleagues that sit next to us. But yeah, we also invite other people that work in our company, not only designers, because has just fixed brains with the things like that, and sometimes it's hard to judge these things because we create them and we see that a lot. So it's good to invite to play some artists which are less experienced with playing the game, to have some fresh look on how they play that. And of course, it's important to be aware of what kind of player is the person you invite to playtest. Because you just have to keep in mind that who is the target of your game, right? So yeah, just like I don't know if that answers your questions, but
thanks for the conference. Working all. Okay. Thanks for the conference. It was a really great talk. Because you haven't talked about it, and what was the impact of the speedrunning community during the
impact of community?
Speedrunning.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't have time to talk about it, but yeah, the impact was very important and which was part of Ghostrunner's success, I think, because yeah, the story is that after we published a demo on Steam, a lot of speedrunners started to play our game, and we found out at this point that our game is perfect for that. We wasn't really aware of about that for this until this point. They discovered some new movement mechanics that we didn't knew. Yeah, and we make some cooperation with them. We talked with them, listened to their feedback, and yeah, that was like a huge part of Ghostrunner's success, I would say.
Hey mate, I was just wondering for which one was your favorite level you made and why? You have a favorite?
Okay. Yeah, the first level, I think, the first one. Maybe because it was first, I don't know. Maybe because we spent a huge amount of time on it, and it was iterated a lot of times, and we had a time to really polish that level. It's good as an example. It was our vertical slice, and it was like a benchmark for us for all the future levels. So yeah, I think the first one. Yeah, so that's...
Can I have one more question? Yeah. Sometimes in games, the first levels are usually bad because they are made in the beginning of the development, and the learning curve through the development is you know, as a level designer, you know that the levels you make at the end are made much faster, and you already have some post-mortem on the first levels. So did you revisit the first level to make a, you know, a better one, or was it great from the beginning? Because this is, you know, some players, you know, just uninstall the game after the first one. if it doesn't click. So the importance of the first one is.
Yeah, this is very true what you just said. And to answer your question, yes, we came back to this level many times and upgraded it. And this level was play tested many times because the first time it was Gamescom demo. So at this point we had a huge feedback with a lot of playtests. We saw a lot of things that we had to change to improve. And yeah, we did that after that. And many times we were coming back to this level and polishing it to maybe not perfection, but to make it really good. But of course, we learned some new things later. Yeah, that's the natural thing.
One, two. Okay, yeah, great presentation, man. So lately we were playing in the Hell DLC, and I noticed that the movement is more dynamic. So my question is, what are the differences in creating the levels where your dynamic is more, powerful by jumping?
Huge question.
We have like 5 minutes more.
That's a question deserve like another whole talk. But yeah, the main difference is that in Hell, yeah, the movement is much more dynamic, but it's also much simpler because of that huge jump. There are not that many wall running, sliding, there is no grappling hook. So these combinations of moves much more simpler than in vanilla Ghostrunner. And of course, the spaces became even bigger. It was huge already, and it came to some cosmic sizes. Okay.
Hi. Did you use dev heat maps?
Where are you? I can see.
Here. Hi. Did you use dev heat maps to like work which parts of the level are like the player die more, or did you just work on the player feedback?
Yeah. We had some analysis connected to. I'm not sure. I don't remember if it was only first level when we were making some playtests, but yes, we had something like that. We had the heat maps with dying, so we could check which places in the level are the most difficult one.
Did you find it useful?
Yeah, sure. Of course, it's great tool for balancing levels, for balancing things. But you need a lot of time to do that. Yeah, right. But yes.
Hey, I really liked your presentation, and I'd like to ask if you had an opportunity to come back and change something about cybervoid sections. How would you approach like the problems that you had with it?
Yeah. Okay. So I think we wasn't aware that these cyber voids are that huge problem until the release of the game. So at this point, we didn't have much more options to change the things. We learned a lesson, and I can say that we will have a different approach to that in sequel that we're working right now. But on the other hand, I think it wasn't like these sections was that horrible, right? That terrible. It has like a mixed opinions. Some players just enjoyed them, others didn't, because, like I said, these sections was too different, so not everybody expected that. But to answer your question, of course, we made some changes during development, during playtest, but it wasn't that drastic changes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's all probably. So thank you again.